granddad, Baker, had now moved to Salisbury and built himself a home, and my brother George had gone to Salisbury, living with his granddad and working in the L.W. Gumby hardware store. We moved. Dad moved to a farm about 2 miles northeast of Berlin on the Ocean City Road, and we went to school from there. Started school in the fall. I guess we really started while I was in Berlin, and then kept on from there. It was now Lawrence who had quit school. Fanny, Ralph, Nell, and myself were the ones going to school, and there was about 2 miles, a little over, to school. So we drove a horse, and Dad had made arrangements for a man who had a barn and an extra stable right at the edge of town, and we'd leave the horse and carriage there and walk on over to the schoolhouse. I was again in first grade, but I had a real nice lady teacher, and school was a breeze. I really enjoyed it that year. That Christmas, I will never forget. Christmas was pretty well organized due to the fact that money was always in short supply, and there was quite a large family. So our Christmas always consisted of, we set plates on the table, and each one would put their name in a plate. And in that plate, we would get a handful of hard candy, 1 orange, 1 apple, and some firecrackers, and the firecrackers depended on the size. A little tacker like me got real small. The larger ones got bigger firecrackers. But on the floor below it, you got 1 toy. Each child got 1 toy. And I had asked for a sled. And I got my sled just as I had asked for. It, of course, was very cheap, made all entirely of wood, with a piece of tin, wooden runner with a piece of tin on it. And but it was painted up in bright reds and yellows and all the colors that you would expect. So, and we always get up when someone would yell, "Santa's been," why, everybody got out of bed about 4 o'clock in the morning. So there was my sled, and I couldn't hardly wait for daylight to go out and try it. We'd had some snow, and it had melted off except in spots. But I knew where there was a hill that still had some snow on it. So just as soon as it was light, I took my sled and headed for that hill. Well, I got up to the top of the hill and got a good running start on a belly flop on the old sled. For about 2 seconds I was flying down to the bottom. Down to the bottom I ran out of snow. The runners stopped. Me and part of the sled kept on going, and I got up and picked up a whole armful of kindling wood that had been my sled, and I probably had the shortest Christmas in history.
Next, Harry tells us about when he's age 6, 1911, working on a huckster wagon, leaving 4 a.m. in the morning and going over to Ocean City. And then the following year tells us about the first cement road being built between Ocean City and Salisbury by Bohemians, immigrants from Europe. Here's Harry.
Ocean City at this time was a little village of one great big hotel, the Atlantic. And then there was lots of cottages where people had summer homes, and some lived there year round. and there was a lot of boarding houses. And there wasn't very much there in the way of markets. The old-fashioned country store where you go in and ask for an item, man wait on you. But fresh vegetables and things like that was just almost non-existent. And all the boarding houses and cottages depended on hucksters. Well, that was a business my dad got himself into, raising vegetables for Ocean City. We had beans and corn and potatoes and asparagus. I just can't think of all the variety of things we had. And every day, my mother, Lawrence, Tammy, and Ralph, they were the production department. They would tend and harvest these crops. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, well, at night, after they picked the beans in the afternoon, everybody sat around and shelled beans and prepared everything for the next day's market. At 4 o'clock in the morning, my dad would get me out of bed, and we'd go out and hitch a horse to a cart and load all the things that we were going to carry. And there's about an hour's drive. It's about 5 miles. It would take about an hour to get over there. So it would be about around 6 o'clock when we got there. Well, you couldn't call your wares out loud because that would disturb the guests, and these people in the rooming houses would have no part of that. So you had to go to the door. All the people would be up preparing breakfast by 6 o'clock, and it was my job to go from door to door and tell the lady what we had on the cart, and if it was something she wanted, then she went out to the cart and Dad waited on her. This went on for a good part of the summer. Another thing that I remember from that summer, they were building a concrete road. And the concrete road was a new deal altogether for most of the country, I guess. The paved, hard cement paved roads, and they were building one from Salisbury to Ocean City. And it just so happened that year they were building right in front of our house. Now, the way they built the road back in those days, the contractor, the only equipment he had to build a road with was a cement mixer. And everything else was done with picks and shovels, wheelbarrows. And they hired an army of about 300, and we called bohics. They were Bohemians, so-called. They were, for the most part, Europeans who had come to this country looking for their fortune, and this was about the best they could do with a pick and shovel job. And most of them couldn't speak English, but they had a little tent city. They all had tents, and as they moved along, where they would move their tents, well, they would be in one section for weeks at a time, and they build a little furnace for baking bread, as was the custom in the old country, and then they made a loaf of real dark brown bread. And what I remember most about this was not so much seeing them work, was the fact that we had a lot of cucumbers that we had raised for sale at Ocean City, and rows of shade trees from our house out to the highway, which was about maybe 100 yards or so. So every day at noon, they would come up. Each man would bring a loaf of his bread he'd baked the night before, and he'd buy the biggest cucumber he could get for a penny. And we had a pump at the barn, and they'd go down to the barn and get a tin cup full of water, and they'd go get under one of these shade trees, and that's where they spent their life. Later that fall, Fanny and myself went to Chincoteague to visit their cousins and aunts. Now, Chincoteague at that time was completely isolated island. There was no road to it. And we got on a train, which was my first train ride, at Berlin, down through Snow Hill to a place called Franklin City. And that was the end of that line, and there was a boat from Chincoteague Island, met every train there to get the passengers, mail, express, whatever they could carry on that boat. Of course, heavy freight was hauled by barges apparently, but so that was the way we went to Chincoteague. The next day, they said, would you like to go downtown? Well, of course I want to go downtown and see everything. They said, well, you may have to fight. Said, every time a new boy comes to town, we lick him. I said, you going to lick me? Well, we won't help, but they're our friends, and we can't fight against them either. So if they lick you, there's nothing we can do about it. So after a while, I reluctantly decided I'd take a chance and go. Maybe they wouldn't lick me. Well, we haven't been down there very long before here come their gang of maybe 6 or 8 boys. And as I took off running, as I always say on the TV police stories, they were in hot pursuit. And they were gaining on me, and I saw I could never run them on the street, so I took up an alley. Down the end of the alley was a board fence right across it, and there I was pinned down an alley, and here they were coming at me, and the leader was coming at me just as hard as he could ever run. And I just braced myself, stuck my arms out, just to stop him. But the force of his running so fast, and my arms being held out stiff, he just rode up over my head, over the fence, and fell on flat his back on the other side of the fence and knocked the wind out. And the boys all stopped, what to do, and I started to them. I said, who's next? And they all flew. Well, the rest of the time I was there, the kids would all come up to me and say, are you the boy that licked so-and-so? I'd say, yes. My head was getting bigger all the time. I'm sure if I hadn't got away from there, that so-and-so would have caught up with me and beat me somewhat. But I got away before he ever caught up with me again.